In December 1991, in Detroit and neighboring city Highland Park, the bodies of two women were discovered in abandoned buildings.
They were being lured in with crack cocaine. Then they were strangled, killed, and left for people to find.
When more bodies started appearing, police from both districts realized that a dangerous predator was roaming their streets.
The community was livid. They wanted it done right now. When are you going to solve it? We didn't have a clue of getting to the suspect yet.
One woman was sure she had survived an attack by the killer, a man she knew as Tony, 24-year-old Benjamin Atkins, but her claims were ignored by the police.
They file a report, but then nothing comes of it. They basically just told her, go home. Everybody knew her, go home, darling.
With every month that passed, the body count continued to rise, until one officer finally took Darlene's claims seriously and drove her out onto the streets to look for her attacker.
She got the hyperventilating. And I grabbed her and physically shook her. I said, what's wrong, Darlene, what's wrong? She said, that's him. That's Tony.
When the truth finally emerged, Benjamin Atkins would be unmasked as one of the world's most evil killers. In 1994, a case that had horrified the city of Detroit concluded, with one of the world's fastest-moving serial killers, 24-year-old Benjamin Atkins, being locked away for life. But when the killings began 3 years earlier, they had gone largely unnoticed.
In the beginning, when they did find that the victims were known prostitutes and they were drug addicts, they were just thought of as the typical homicides that were happening in the city at the time.
To find a deceased sex worker was not at all unusual in Detroit.
When the community started demanding answers, 4 law enforcement agencies came together to catch the killer.
Atkins had the whole city paralyzed with fear. Women were genuinely afraid to go out at night on their own, particularly in the Highland Park area.
The FBI profilers were stating that he killed more people in less time than Jack the Ripper. And to be involved in that case was something that I will always remember.
This killer's story begins in Ohio on August the 26th, 1968.
Benjamin Atkins had what you could describe as a catastrophic childhood. He was the younger of 2 brothers, and by 1970 his father had disappeared.
His mom, Judy, was on her own with these 2 young, very young boys. And so at that point, she went to Detroit where her mom was living. But Judy was really absent through Benjamin's childhood. She was addicted to heroin, and she was doing prostitution.
She simply couldn't cope, and it wasn't long before Benjamin was put into care.
He was in the foster system from a very early age, from the age of 4 or 5 years old. He and his brother were shuttled from one foster home to another.
He got shipped around and eventually wound up in a boys' home where he was physically and sexually abused on a regular basis.
In 1980, at the age of 11, Atkins was discharged from the care system.
He's returned to his mother, but nothing really has changed. He watches her have sex with various men at various points.
The boys were left to their own devices. And that is when Benjamin, as a teenager, started hustling on the street. He learned he could get money by selling himself with men on the street. From there, Benjamin got into a variety of drugs, and he graduated to crack cocaine.
It was a way out. It was an escape for him from the horrors of the life that he was leading.
In the 1980s, Detroit was a city in decline.
We had a drug problem at the time. We had street sales of crack cocaine and heroin that were rampant. The city was overwhelmed with the narcotics trade.
Crack was available very easily, very cheap, and people got addicted very quickly.
By the time Atkins got to be an adult, he was spending a lot of his time on the streets. He was homeless off and on. Sometimes he would stay with his brother. Sometimes he would just be sleeping in abandoned buildings. And that's when the crimes began.
In his early 20s, Atkins' violent tendencies started to emerge.
Atkins was very methodical. He followed the same formula. He would meet a female, and maybe it was someone he even saw around. People tended to know each other there on Woodward Ave in Highland Park in Detroit. And so he would typically talk to her, engage her in conversation, say, hey, I've got something to smoke. You have a pipe? That was the question that he asked the one known survivor at the time, Darlene, do you have a pipe to smoke with? And that's how he was able to lure her off to a dark corner and then try to kill her. Darlene was someone who was a mom and a wife in Highland Park. She had boys.
In October 1991, Darlene's youngest son, Rashad Green, was 12 years old.
It's not enough time for the words to put in about my mother. Nothing she wouldn't do for her family, especially her kids. There's nothing she wouldn't do for us.
Alongside caring for her family, however, 34-year-old Darlene struggled with drug addiction.
She was known around the area. She was part of the community. She also spent some time on the street, and she spent some time doing prostitution.
Even when she ventured off into different things, she would always make her way back to see if nobody else, me, her baby. I used to sit in my front room window and look out the window looking for my mother to come walking up at any moment. Some days I wouldn't go to sleep waiting up looking for her. I would get on my bike and ride through the neighborhood looking for my mother. That's my mama.
Darlene had seen Atkins on Woodward Ave in Highland Park, and she knew him as Tony. That was his street name. There was one night, early morning hours, like 3 or 4 in the morning, Darlene was out and about, and she was on her way somewhere, and she encountered Tony. Tony asked her, do you have a pipe? You want to go smoke somewhere? And there was nothing unusual about that at all.
Highland Park in Detroit had been a prosperous community, but it had gone downhill very quickly, reflecting the collapse of the economy of Detroit as a whole.
Most of the buildings on the southern Woodward corridor were abandoned. There was hundreds, if not thousands, of houses in the city that were abandoned.
They went to the outside of an abandoned restaurant. Tony said something about, it's a little windy out here, let's go inside. Once they get inside, she's reaching for the pipe, and all of a sudden he grabs her, and he takes the coat that she's wearing and brings it down around her arms so she can't move.
He attacked her, he raped her, but then he attacked her again. And at that point, she started screaming.
She realizes that her life is in danger, and so she's fighting him. She manages to hit him hard enough to give her a moment to run outside. She runs outside, she's yelling, screaming, help, help, rape. There's actually someone nearby. He heard Darlene screaming, and he's like, where are you at? And that was enough, knowing that there was another man there who was approaching, that was enough to make Atkins run away.
Darlene Saunders was embarrassed, didn't want to tell anybody about the attack that she'd suffered, and she simply went home.
Richard remembers his mother arriving home that night.
She just hugged me all night. Sat right there with me. I just love you so much. And, you know, I knew something was wrong. I'm just asking, you know, Mama, what's wrong? What are you talking about? I love you too. Once she did finally go to sleep, of course, I had to go to school in the morning. I got myself together, went to school, come back. She was still here. Because normally she would be gone.
That night wasn't the last time Darlene would meet her attacker.
She saw him at a crack house not too long after that. And she was coming up to the house and he held the door for her to come in. And she said, "Tony, why did you do that to me?" And he said, "I don't want to talk about it." She did not go to police because truthfully, for a lot of the women in this situation, they get attacked all the time. So she kept the story to herself.
I don't think it's surprising at all that Darlene didn't report what had happened to her. I mean, look at the world she was living in. I fully expect that she didn't think anyone would believe her, that anybody would see her as important enough to investigate that crime.
Benjamin Atkins had got away with assaulting a vulnerable young mother, but he wasn't about to stop there, and the next time his attack would end in murder. In 1991, a man with the desire to kill was prowling the streets of Detroit. It would be December before his crimes would start to be exposed.
December 14th, 1991 was when Debbie Friday was discovered in Highland Park. She was probably only killed the day before because that's about when she was last seen. So she was not lying there very long in an empty building before she was discovered. Later that month, Bertha Mason was discovered. That was by Detroit police.
At the time, we were dealing with not as many officers as we should have on the street.
We weren't getting properly funded. We had laid off 10 police officers.
So it was not good conditions to be catching a violent, fast-moving killer.
Both victims were sex workers who were known to the police. And just a few days later, at the start of the new year, the body count continued to rise.
So then January 1992, January 3rd, there's a demolition company at a house. One of the workers saw something over by the chain link fence that was unusual, almost thought it was a mannequin at first, and they discovered it was a woman, the body of a woman. And that was Patricia Cannon George.
With the discovery of a third body, the media was starting to ask questions.
The writer for the Detroit News came up and asked, could he speak with me? I said, sure. He was saying, what information do you have on the serial killers? We didn't use, at that time, serial killer. We used multiple homicides and things like this. Detroit Police Department, their homicide division said there was no such thing occurring in their community. We knew that was not true. We knew that there was incidents occurring in Detroit. Usually there's cooperation of law enforcement between police agencies. Our officers from Highland Park went to Detroit and they got buzzed off. So there were no communications, which made it extremely difficult.
It was only a few weeks before police were called to yet another crime scene.
Later in January 1992, Vicki Truelove was discovered at an abandoned nursing home along Woodward Ave. That's 4 women, 3 in Detroit and 1 in Highland Park. Detroit has no choice but to think, okay, maybe it's the same person doing this. We got the same MO, we got the same victim type. Maybe we have a serial killer.
The scenes were very chaotic. All of them were in abandoned buildings. And you had rubbish and litter and construction material that's fallen from the buildings.
All 4 victims had crack cocaine in their system, and all had been manually strangled.
Some of the bodies have been there for several weeks, not in the best condition.
Although police were no closer to finding the killer, the crime scenes were yielding some clues.
Used condoms were found near some of the bodies.
At one location, they was able to get a palm print.
Then there was the discovery at the Monterey Motel in February 1992 that blew the case wide open.
The Monterey Motel was in Highland Park in Detroit, on what was known as the Woodward Corridor. And it had a good past, but like Detroit itself, had begun to decay dreadfully, and it had become a home for vagrants. It was often used by sex workers.
On February 17th, 1992, a man searching for scrap material in the motel made a gruesome discovery.
He goes into the bathroom of one of the empty rooms, and he sees what appears to be a body part of a person. And he realizes, okay, wow, this is a dead woman that I have found here. And so he runs out of there, he gets police.
Highland Park public safety officers arrived at the scene and made the decision to check the rest of the motel.
There were just trash everywhere. Bits and pieces of rubble, parts of the room, wrappers from food and cigarettes and liquor bottles, and just trash everywhere. They go through each of the rooms, and lo and behold, they find 2 other females in 2 other rooms, and all 3 women have been left there at different times.
They didn't have any identification, and that's not unusual for people who's working the street. They don't carry identification on them.
DNA wasn't a big thing in the early 90s. We didn't have a DNA database. So most of them were identified by their fingerprints.
2 of the 3 bodies were identified as Valerie Chalk and Juanita Hardy. The identity of the 3rd body found inside the Monterey Motel would remain a mystery for many years.
For this Jane Doe, they had her fingerprints, and they had a lot of missing females on record to test her against. They ran her prints against a lot of different women with no results whatsoever.
And they found 3 at once, and they were all killed in the same fashion. They realized that it had to be one person killing the people in the same way. They then linked it together with some of the other bodies that were being found. And they knew at that time that they had a problem that they were going to need assistance with.
Michigan State Police profiler David Minzy was called in to help.
I was asked to come in when they discovered the 3 bodies in the abandoned motel in Highland Park. Profiling is something that we can provide detectives who may never have investigated a serial killer.
David started putting together a profile of the killer.
I always felt that he was in that area specifically because he was comfortable there. And I think that there was some thought that maybe somebody else was coming in to Highland Park from the suburbs. And I never felt that to be true. I thought that he was in there, he didn't stand out, he didn't draw any attention to himself, and that's how he was able to operate for so long and do so much damage.
7 bodies had now been discovered. Women were terrified to go out after dark. The communities of Highland Park and Detroit were being targeted by a serial killer, and he was far from finished. By 1992, 7 bodies had been discovered in and around abandoned buildings in the cities of Highland Park and Detroit in Michigan. Police were following up all sorts of leads, but were no closer to identifying their killer.
Usually when you start looking at a murder, the first thing you're going to think about is motivation. And if there's no relationship, where do you even start? And that's why serial killers are difficult to catch. It's that complete lack of relationship. This could be literally anybody.
At the time, it was sort of chaos. We were going around asking informants for any leads, and there was a lot of people that were giving us leads and telling us people that they thought were the person. And we were doing our jobs. We were going to those people, investigating them and questioning them, trying to figure out where they were at the times of these deaths.
We had girlfriends reporting their boyfriends, wives reporting their husbands, and none of it was credible.
There was a lot of fear in Detroit and Highland Park when the news was getting around that there was a serial killer. And there were residents in Highland Park especially that were worried about their children walking to school, that were worried about just taking a walk anywhere in the city.
The streets were barren as soon as the streetlights came on. You could walk from one end to the next and probably wouldn't pass 2 people.
As the body count grew, so did the interest from the media.
It worked the community up in a frenzy. They wanted it done right now. Why haven't we solved this? We're finding bodies. What are you doing about this? When are you going to solve it? We didn't have a clue of getting to the suspect yet.
Darlene Saunders, who'd survived an attack the year before by the man she knew as Tony, heard the news reports.
She could feel in her heart that it was Tony that did this to the women. And so in March, she goes to police and she sits down and she tells her story. They file a report, but then nothing comes of it.
They looked at her as a drug addict, prostitute. Who gonna do something to you like this?
They basically just told her, go home. You know, everybody knew her, go home, darling.
She was overlooked. She was treated like an object, just pushed to the side.
Meanwhile, 43-year-old Vicky Marie Beasley Brown went out one night and didn't return home.
Vicky Marie Beasley Brown, she was a mom. She had kids at home.
Vicky Marie's eldest daughter, Renee, was 23 years old when her mum went missing.
My mom was a very innocent, creative, charismatic ball of energy. She loved singing and drawing and writing and cooking, but she didn't really have a lot of street sense. She trusted people probably a little bit too much.
She was not living on the street. She had a home, but she had had troubles in her adulthood. She had had struggles with dependency on drugs.
She struggled with addiction, but she was not a prostitute. That was not her lifestyle.
Renee was out of the country when she heard that Vicky Marie was missing, but her 9- and 10-year-old sisters still lived at home with their mum.
We are a married Air Force family. At the time, we were living in Germany, and we had just had our first baby, and we got the news that my mom was missing. And from that, I just kind of knew something was wrong because she missed my little sister's birthday, and that's something she would have never done. It was terrifying because I'm not only thinking about the fact that she's missing, I'm thinking that I have 2 little siblings who are little girls that I'm like, well, where are they at? Who are they with?
As Vicky Marie's family waited for news, another death was linked to the active serial killer.
In April, Brenda Mitchell was discovered in an abandoned house in Highland Park.
On April 15th, 1992, yet another body was uncovered at an abandoned building in Highland Park. Public Safety Officer Craig Pulverenti was first on the scene.
We found a female body. She was covered in debris. Her clothes were half off, and we realized that it had probably been a murder and a sexual assault at the same time.
The body was soon identified as 43-year-old Vicky Marie Beasley Brown. It was the news her daughter had been dreading.
The thing that's really tragic is that she just ended up at the wrong place at the wrong time and met up with the wrong person, because that was not her life. That was not what she did. That wasn't who she was. It was probably the scariest, most helpless time in my life, because I felt like there was nothing I was going to be able to say or do to make things right for those two little people who lost their mom.
Highland Park police knew that they needed to start communicating with the Detroit Police Department if they were to have any hope of finding the killer who was terrorizing their streets. Finally, a meeting was set up and a multi-agency task force was created.
Michigan State Police, Wayne County Sheriff's Department, and the Detroit office of the FBI. They all sent officers in to help.
And from there, after that, it came together.
They realized that all the victims had similarities. They were all choked. They were all sexually assaulted.
With the arrival of summer in Highland Park, the temperatures increased.
In June, police were alerted to a foul smell that was coming out of an abandoned commercial building on Woodward Ave in Highland Park.
The original call came that there was a stench coming from the building and somebody believed it to be a body. So I was dispatched there along with a couple of command officers. And as we got there and we entered the building, there were flies everywhere. And it appeared that the stench could just be from the garbage. So at the time, the two command officers stood back at the door and I said I'd go in and further investigate. As I walked in further, I did look down and I saw a leg hanging out from beneath the garbage.
The 10th body was identified as 40-year-old Joanne O'Rourke.
When I had an opportunity to view all of the victims and how they were murdered, that I really had a pretty good understanding of the type of person that we would be looking for.
David Mincy concluded that the killer was likely to be a black male who lived in the local area. He indicated that he could be a familiar face to some, if not all, of the victims.
They gave us a perfect profile of what the killer would be, and they were dead on their profile.
I think the profile really helped the investigators know that they're on the right track, that you're heading in the right direction, and you're going to find him.
What police didn't realize is they'd already taken and put aside a statement from a possible survivor of the killer they were so desperate to catch.
In the summer of 1992, one of Darlene's family members put pressure on the police to look at her evidence again.
At that point, they finally found Darlene's old police report from March, and they had her come back in. And finally, police are taking her seriously, that this Tony could be the killer. They decided, okay, we want to go out to Woodward Avenue and see if we can find this Tony guy who attacked Darlene. So Darlene was assigned to an officer with the Michigan State Police named Royce Elston.
My job was to take Darlene out every night, hoping that we spotted the guy that had assaulted her.
Officer Royce, he just kept saying that we gonna get him. My mother said that didn't nobody believe me, so why you believe me? I believe you, we gonna get him.
Nighttime was Tony's time, and so Darlene knew that. And so it was always nighttime when they went out, and Royce would have Darlene with him, and they would be out prowling around Woodward Avenue looking for Tony like a few times a week.
Darlene was one of a kind. She would tell me these war stories, how she had to jump out of a car, how she had to jump out of a motel room, how she had to run to get away. And I said, stop telling me all these war stories and look at these people out on the street.
Darlene took him to all kinds of places, all kinds of little nooks and crannies on Woodward Ave in the drug culture, in the seedy street culture that police had no idea even existed. They did this for a few weeks before one night when Darlene finally spotted Tony. He was at a payphone, and Royce and Darlene were in a car, and Darlene started to react. She started to basically hyperventilate.
I thought she was sick. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? And I grabbed her and physically shook her. I said, what's wrong, Darlene? What's wrong? She said, that's him. That's Tony. And I said, are you sure? She said, Royce, that's him.
He stops the car, he gets out, he approaches this guy.
I said, are you Tony? He said, yeah. I said, do you know who I am? He said, yeah. He said, you're the state trooper that's been looking for me. I said, well, son, you got two choices. And he says, what's my choices? I say, either you can lay down on the ground or you can die. And I drew my weapon.
With nowhere to run, the man lay on the ground and the arrest was made. Darlene's attacker, Tony, was in fact 24-year-old Benjamin Atkins.
He knew he was going to get caught. It was the inevitable ending. I don't think he'd have stopped until he was stopped.
I was glad that he was caught because I still didn't understand what happened. My father just kept saying that my mother did a good thing.
Darlene was very important to the case. To be honest, I don't think we would have got this solved if it wasn't for Darlene.
Police were certain they finally had their man. A killer responsible for at least 10 murders was in custody. But what he had to tell detectives would shock them to the core. By the summer of 1992, the bodies of 10 females had been found in the cities of Detroit and Highland Park in Michigan. On August 20th, Benjamin Atkins had finally been apprehended and was in police custody.
About a day and a half after Atkins was arrested, they questioned him. And at first, Atkins was denying everything. Nope, didn't do it, don't know these women, have no idea what you're talking about. And they were getting nowhere.
That's the nature of an interview with somebody like him. You can't go in and in 5 minutes get a confession. It takes time. You have to learn about him, learn about why he may be the person that he is.
And so they called in an officer with Detroit police named Ron Sanders, who was known to be a very good interrogator. Sanders took an approach of redemption, like, okay, you can't save these women now, but you can help yourself. And he was able to get Atkins to finally crack and to finally confess these crimes.
No remorse whatsoever. I did this. I'm the guy that did that.
On August 21st, 1992, Atkins started spilling the details of all 10 murders the police were aware of. He also confessed to the assault on Darlene Saunders.
He would follow this formula of engaging the female in conversation, taking her somewhere, an abandoned house, an abandoned commercial building, because there were lots of them to choose from on Woodward Ave. And there they would start to smoke some crack. Then things went sideways for Atkins.
Benjamin knew if he had drugs, these girls would follow him to the end of time.
You manipulate somebody to kill them. It's evil.
Almost always he would take a piece of their clothing or maybe an object found nearby to bind them. They would pass out. He would rape them. Sometimes they would come to. He would strangle them again, and when he had strangled them to the point that he felt they were dead, he would actually check to make sure they were dead. He would press on their chest or their stomach. He would feel for a pulse. He would check to see if there was any breath coming out of them. So he followed all of these steps to make sure that they were dead. Then he would find some place to hide them.
For a person to just willingly go out and kill people like that, I think that's a new level of evil.
Saunders had wrote out every confession, had him sign it as soon as he finished, and then go to the next one. We literally looked at each other like, whoa.
Atkins' confessions didn't end there, however. He had one more shock in store.
He said, I'm gonna give you a body that you guys haven't found. And that right there hit me like a ton of bricks.
Out of nowhere, Atkins had confessed to an 11th murder.
That was C.C. Waymer, the final person he killed at the end of May. So police went that day in August to discover her body in an empty garage in Highland Park.
He said it was down in the basement. Now this was a garage, and I walked that beat, and I knew the exact place that they were speaking of, but I never knew it had a basement. The crime scene was ideal. There was nothing else in the basement, not one thing. The temperature was cold enough that the body was in ideal condition.
Police were keen to find out the motive behind Atkins' crimes.
He did talk about a hatred for prostitutes. And as Ron Sanders was questioning him, he was picking up on a very troubled childhood. And he was hearing about the mom who would take her little boys and put them in the back seat while she was in the front seat with a John.
When it comes to serial killers, quite often we see that same childhood experience, that they weren't really loved like you should a child.
There were cops who worked this case who said that he was killing his mother over and over and over. They fit the characteristics of his mother. They were women who were working the streets. They were women who were using drugs, and they were women of color. They were varying ages, but they fit the type of his mom.
I actually have no sympathy at all for Atkins and his troubled past. People have even worse pasts than Atkins had, and they do not go on to hurt, much less kill anyone.
After Atkins was arrested in August 1992, as police were piecing together the details of all of these murders, they tried to put together a time frame. It was probably 6 to 7 months that these 11 murders happened, which is very chilling.
In August 1992, Atkins was arraigned for 11 murders and the assault on Darlene Saunders.
There seemed to be a lot of media attention before Atkins was identified and arrested, when there was a killer out there who was unknown and we didn't know who he was going to strike next. But then by the time his trial came around in January 1994, Judge Kerwin couldn't help but notice, where did the media go? Does anybody still care about this case? I think it has become a bit of a cliche. This is just another serial killer killing sex workers. So why should we care about that?
They were mothers. They were somebody other than a drug addict or a prostitute. They were people.
The prosecution in this case went in with confessions that Atkins made to all the crimes, DNA evidence against him, and a witness, a survivor, who identified him as the person who attacked her. That was quite a lot to overcome for his defense attorney. And his defense attorney at one point felt like he might pursue an insanity defense. And so he hired a psychiatrist to evaluate Atkins. He had been, by this point, telling not only police, but the psychiatrists who were evaluating him that he was hearing voices, that he had these alternate personalities in his head. The dominant one was named Tony, and Tony was the one who told him to do the crimes. But how much was pretense and how much was genuine, I think that's something that only Benjamin Atkins knew.
In my opinion, he was that one evil person that once he killed somebody, he enjoyed it.
The man was a monster. Let's just be truthful. He was a monster. He didn't care. He didn't care.
Psychiatrists deemed Atkins fit to stand trial, and on January the 10th, 1994, proceedings began at the Wayne County Circuit Court. Darlene Saunders, now clean from drugs, was called to testify.
Darlene Saunders was an extremely brave woman. When she testified at Atkins' preliminary hearing, she stood up to a barrage of cross-examination designed to question her character and her reliability as a witness, but she fought her corner admirably.
She grabbed the prosecutor, showing them how he tried to strangle her. It was like, wow. Amazing woman. There's nothing that she couldn't do.
On April 14th, 1994, the jurors began their deliberations. It took them less than 3 days to reach a verdict. Benjamin Atkins was found guilty on all 11 murder charges and the rape of Darlene Saunders.
After he was tried and convicted, and when the time came for his sentencing, and he had his chance to make a statement, he did not apologize to anyone. He put the emphasis on himself, what he had gone through.
Benjamin Atkins received 11 life sentences for the murders, plus an additional life sentence for Darlene Saunders' rape.
When Atkins was sentenced, it was a great relief to everyone from the victim families who was in the courtroom to Darlene herself. When they announced a sentence for her own charges for the rape and the attack that she had suffered, she yelled, "Praise you, Jesus."
On September 17th, 1997, after serving just 3 years of his life sentence, Benjamin Atkins died in prison. He was 29 years old.
He was serving out his sentences in one of the correctional facilities in Jackson, Michigan, and then he died of HIV/AIDS. So we have to wonder, okay, did he get tested? Did he learn he had HIV? Was there any of that going on in his brain when these murders were happening? We just don't know.
In 2023, over 30 years after the murders, the Jane Doe who was found at the Monterey Motel was finally identified using forensic genetic genealogy. At the request of her family, her name has not been publicly disclosed.
It's fantastic how well the scientific community has helped with police investigations. It's a very good thing for law enforcement and a very bad thing for criminals because it's a little harder for them to get away with things these days.
One of the problems with serial killers and this interest that we have in them is that we completely forget sometimes. There are real people who were victims here who really, really suffered.
I would like my mom to be remembered as a loving mom who cared about her kids, but who was at the wrong place at the wrong time. She was a gift to our family. So many times we allow people's decisions and their past to dictate and shape your future. And ultimately, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you navigate it. Her life has created a legacy of love and purpose and identity and value in all of us that we share with the people that we come in contact with.
Darlene Saunders continued to struggle with her addictions, but she'd been clean for a year when she passed away in 2002.
My mother did a lot of things not so nice, and she did a lot of things that were nice. I'd do anything to experience that again. You don't know how important somebody is until you don't have them anymore.
Benjamin Atkins took the lives of 11 women. He lured them to their deaths by preying on their vulnerabilities and made sure their final moments were filled with horror. Had it not been for Darlene Saunders, he may never have been revealed as one of the world's most evil killers.